Welcome back to CBS This Morning. Critics are blasting the approval of a controversial new drug to help treat Alzheimer's disease. The first patient who was not part of a clinical trial got the drug last week. Clinical trials showed it may reduce amyloid plaque, believed to be a marker of Alzheimer's disease. But it's not clear whether it delays or prevents actual symptoms. The FDA's independent advisory committee recommended the agency reject the drug. When the FDA ignored that advice, 3 committee members resigned, including Dr. Aaron Kesselheim. First, on CBS This Morning, our Dr. Tara Narula spoke with Dr. Kesselheim, who's a faculty member at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. He explained why he resigned from the committee.
In your resignation letter, you called the Aduhelm approval the worst drug approval in U.S. history. Why do you say that?
The drug showed no good evidence that it worked because it had important side effects. And then the FDA is totally switching gears over the last 6 months and approving this drug on the basis of a theory relating to the surrogate marker of amyloid plaques that we as an advisory committee back in November were told to not consider. And if the FDA allows companies to get drugs approved on the basis of trials that are stopped early, trials that are reanalyzed, that sets a precedent because it tells other companies, well, I don't need to run a rigorous trial either.
What message do you hope to send to the FDA by resigning?
Patients and physicians really do depend on the FDA maintaining reasonable standards for the drugs that it provides. In the majority of cases, I like to think that the FDA makes the right decision. In cases like this, where the FDA makes what I think is the wrong decision, I think that we need to understand better why the decisions were made in this way.
And Dr. Narula joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning, Michelle.
Good to see you. So the FDA approved this drug without the recommendation of its committee. I mean, how often do they do this?
This is pretty uncommon. So 80% of the time, there's concordance between what the advisory committee recommends and what the FDA does. In the 20% of time where there's discordance, 3/4 of those are instances where the advisory committee recommends for the drug and the FDA actually says no or puts limitations on it. So this is pretty rare. And when I spoke to Dr. Kesselheim about what really pushed him to resign, there were a couple things. I think the first was the big feeling that the FDA in this case did not follow the science, that there was really a lack of efficacy for this drug and significant concern for side effects. 1/3 of the patients had brain hemorrhage or bleeding. Right. There was a question about why this lack of transparency in his mind, why this big 180-degree shift from the committee being told don't review it on the basis of surrogate endpoints like amyloid to suddenly that's actually how they approved it. Why wasn't the advisory committee called back to assess this idea of a surrogate endpoint? And then the third issue is really how this frustration over how are the advisory committee's recommendations being integrated and used. He actually pointed to a similar approval of a muscular dystrophy drug several years ago where he was on the committee, they voted against it, it was a surrogate endpoint, and the FDA pushed it through without really explaining why.
So we need to note, Tara, that Biogen, the maker of this drug, says it submitted to the FDA millions of pages of data and analysis from 8 clinical trials. The FDA said in a statement, our review has been thorough. So why are critics like Dr. Kesselheim still not satisfied?
Well, Anthony, there's several other issues. I think one of them centers around this idea that the Biogen company was given 9 years after the approval to perform a confirmatory study to show efficacy. And according to Dr. Kesselheim, the drugs that were used to approve this, the trials that were used to approve this, took 4 years. So why are they being given 9 years? In previous history of drugs that were approved under accelerated approval pathways, many times there was delays in these confirmatory trials. If the studies were negative, the drugs were not then pulled off the market. And so this is a significant period of time where there can be harm to patients, both financially and medically. And then another issue around labeling. So this drug was studied in patients with mild Alzheimer's disease who had proven imaging of amyloid plaques. But the label says it can be used for all patients with Alzheimer's disease without really being clear about whether they need imaging proof of amyloid. And then finally, is this really going to push the research away from other therapies that might be helpful to drugs like this? And there have been dozens and dozens of other drugs that have looked at removing amyloid and not shown efficacy.
Rare disagreement between the FDA and its committee. Also noteworthy that these families want hope, and if this doesn't provide it, That's very concerning.
That's right.
Dr. Narula, thank you very much. Coming up.